Hey guys, I'm Evan. Welcome to August Pine Workshop, and today I'm going to show you how I built this super easy workbench with retractable casters. So at the start of every video, I just wanted to share a verse or some scripture with you all. So today's verse is from Hebrews chapter 12. A lot of the cuts that I had to make were all similar sizes, so you can see here that I used a cinder block to serve as a stop block. After I cut down all the 2x4s, I went ahead and started building my legs with some 2.5 inch construction screws. So I just turned these into 4 L-shaped pieces. Next, I went ahead and added a horizontal piece to connect my legs on each end. And you can see here that I also used a little spacer that was just a scrap 2x4 to leave the appropriate amount of space on each end, which you'll see when I build the rest of the frame, why it's important to have that space. And I also checked to make sure everything was square throughout the process. Next, I laid out my 2 end pieces and I started to add the framing for the top. So this was just 3 long 2x4s that were all running across the top of the table. And this is going to provide a really strong, super steady surface for my plywood top. Once I had the top framing complete, it was time to go ahead and lay out the framing for my bottom shelf. Next, it was time to work on my favorite part of this build, which is the super easy retractable casters. And I did want to show you all this awesome magnetic tray that I have here. It makes it super easy to keep track of screws and nuts and bolts when you're working on your project. So I highly recommend checking that out. For my retractable casters, I just went ahead and took apart an old Harbor Freight moving cart and cut down some of the pieces, used the wheels right off of there, and I was able to have a really affordable and super effective retractable caster for my workbench. I also do want to make sure to shout out my inspiration for that, so if you check out the description, I'll leave a link to another video I saw on how to make those casters. Next, it was time for me to lay out my bottom frame. So I went ahead and measured and marked the different spots where I wanted to have my 2x4s and positioned those all in place and got them secured down. To make each of my casters retractable, I just went ahead and used a basic door hinge, and now I was going to secure it to the casters and then also to the bottom frame to allow the wheels to flip up and down as needed. So I went ahead and drilled some holes and secured those into place. Once I had my hinges in place, it was time to test out my idea. And what I realized is I was going to need a latch. Every time I was pushing the cart, even with some weight on it, it was flipping over and kind of crashing on the ground. So that's where I came up with the idea to add a latch. I'll show a little bit more with adding the latch later, but for the time being, I went ahead and secured into place my bottom frame. Next, it was time for me to add my top. So for this, I used 1/2 inch plywood and I left a little bit of overhang on each of the sides to allow to have a nice clamping surface. Next, it was time to cut the plywood for my bottom shelf. So for this, I actually used 1/4 inch subflooring, but it would be really easy to use any leftover material that you have. And I think this is going to be perfectly strong for what I need. One mistake that I did notice before installing my bottom shelf was that my wheels were running into the frame of the leg, so I went ahead and used a multi-tool and cut that off to allow for the clearance. Next, I added some brackets, and these are going to be used to secure the tabletop. The reason why I chose to go with brackets was so I wouldn't have any screws poking up through the top of the table, and it would also allow me to easily replace the top in the future. And after that, it was time just to secure everything down. So I got my bottom shelf and my top shelf all put on there, sanded the edges a little bit, clamped it down, and secured it with screws. Here you can see me working on the latch, and I ended up having to make a little bit of spacer just to get the latch properly aligned with the center of my leg. So I went ahead, drilled some holes, and got that secured into place, and that seemed to hold my retractable casters in place super easily and super effectively. Now it's time for the big reveal, and I'm super happy with how this turned out. You can see that the wheels work super effectively, no issues turning. It's really easy to raise up and lower back down just using that little latch right there, and now I have the perfect workbench. My main goals of this project were to have something that was going to be really easy to move around, have an easy clamping surface, and also serve as an outfeed table for my table saw. And thankfully I was able to accomplish all three of those in this build, all while keeping my costs pretty low. One thing that I definitely wanted to include in this video was a detailed cost breakdown. I was able to use a lot of leftover materials, so my costs were lower, but this is what it would cost to buy them new. I used 12 2x4s for $58, plywood for the top was $40, the bottom shelf between $17 and $40, construction screws about $10, L-bracket screws for $4, L-brackets for about $11, the rolling cart for $10 from Harbor Freight, hinges for about $8, and barrel bolts for $6 for a total of $163. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out today's video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, please go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel, and check out some of the awesome content that we're going to have coming out in the near future. Thanks again.